Hello everyone, for Telestar, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. This is From the South. To begin today, our top story once again takes us to Central America, to Guatemala. After being stripped of his immunity, the president there, Otto Perez Molina, has been barred from leaving the country, and the Attorney General, Thelma Aldana, has now requested his arrest. She recalled that the president is now a common citizen before the justice system. Under Guatemalan law, Perez Molina could be automatically removed from office if remanded in custody by a judge. The Constitutional Court is expected to decide this Wednesday over the protection asked Monday by Perez Molina's lawyers to reverse the lifting of his immunity.
At the moment, he is a common citizen, even though he is president of the republic. He is a common citizen before the justice system, given that he lost his immunity. As a result, there will be criminal prosecution against the president.
Our correspondent Jorge Gestoso is in Guatemala. We turn to him now for the latest.
Welcome from Guatemala City, where we are 3 days away from the presidential elections this Sunday, the 6th. And we're expecting this afternoon the decision of the Constitutional Court, where the lawyer of President Otto Perez Molina has presented 2 appeals. The court has to take the decision, and according to their resolution, it could leave the decision of the Congress yesterday afternoon that lift the immunity of President Otto Perez Molina without effect. This is key, but even though most of the analysts agree that it's not going to happen, that the trial against President Otto Perez Molina for charges of corruption will take place, will continue, and on top of that, everybody is getting ready for the elections. At a certain moment, there was some doubts if the elections could take place. Now it's absolutely a fact that are going to take place. Everything in that sense is normal, and people are still enjoying, are still celebrating the decision of the Congress of lifting the immunity of President Otto Perez Molina, that is going to be tried as a regular citizen. Many things are taking place in Guatemala, and we're going to giving you information up to date, up to the minute of what's going on. Now we get back to you in studios.
Elsewhere around Latin America, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has renewed his calls for diplomatic help to resolve the impasse with Venezuela over border closures. Now, this one day after his proposal to have foreign ministers address the issue failed to secure enough votes at the OAS. Now, in an address to the Colombian nation Tuesday night, Santos made clear he will press on and claimed he does not feel defeated by the setback. He also wondered whether the lack of support at the OAS, which came up 1 vote short, was the result of political calculations, and questioned the influence of ideology and economics. With no solution in sight, Santos spoke to the nation and repeated his diplomatic request.
In view of the gravity of the issue, we request the Organization of American States Permanent Council holds a meeting of foreign ministers, as we trust that none can avoid a debate over the contemporary and urgent situation related to human rights.
And President Santos also said that his government is considering taking the case to the International Criminal Court.
The Attorney General informed me that he is seriously considering, as a part of his autonomy, to file a complaint at the International Criminal Court against members of the civil and military leadership of Venezuelan government that could be responsible for crimes against humanity as established by the Rome Statute.
The Venezuelan government, for its part, has repeated its calls for peace. During his TV show from Beijing, China, President Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela said the matter should not be resolved in such an international forum, and explained he has asked for a direct meeting with Santos to clear up the situation.
I said on Saturday, a couple of days before leaving on this tour in Asia, that my responsibility with my country and people, as well as my constitutional responsibility, is to continue to take radical and structural steps to construct a new border. On the Colombian side, the territory and the people are controlled by paramilitary gangs and drug traffickers who are staging an economic war and are attacking our currency.
narcotraficantes. Nos hacen guerra económica, atacan la moneda.
And in Colombia's capital of Bogota, now hundreds of peasant farmers accuse the government of ignoring their rights. They are also calling on authorities to move forward with promised agricultural reforms. Now, the campesinos, many of them indigenous, ask the government to commit to defending their lives and to avoid killing their leaders, as well as damaging their land with projects that affect the environment. The protesters said they would not end their demonstrations until the government responded to their demands. And we're going to take a look at some figures now to understand better the situation of poverty of most of those Colombian campesinos. Now, according to the Colombian magazine Semana, poverty in the Colombian countryside reaches 65%. 60% of rural employment is informal. 83% of the rural population are into the subsidized health scheme. 55% of poor farmers never had technical aid. 11% have no homes, 80% have no access to electricity, illiteracy reaches 11.5%, 60% don't have drinking water, and 20% of the youth between 5 and 16 years never went to school. And a number of different campesino, indigenous, and Afro-descendant organizations grouped in the so-called Agrarian Summit have expressed their concern regarding the border crisis with Venezuela. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita now reports from Bogota.
Catatumbo, a region shared by Colombia and Venezuela. That's where Olga comes from the Colombian side. A tireless leader, always struggling for campesinos' rights, Olga remembers the paramilitary violence that hit her hometown, leaving at least 100,000 displaced.
Many of those 114,000 displaced people from Catatumbo ended up in Venezuela, and it was thanks to Venezuela that we didn't get killed. Now some come out criticizing the Venezuelan government when it was the one that sheltered us and gave us a hand to men and women who were under risk of being assassinated by paramilitaries, and that was specifically during Álvaro Uribe government.
Others from the same rural region of Catatumbo recall the lack of opportunities in the Colombian side of the border. The absence of development policies and social programs in the rural areas has made it a challenge for those attempting to return from the neighboring country.
There are no opportunities to return and never have been. We, among many campesinos and indigenous people, returned in 2003 without any guarantees from the government. We return among many difficulties, and that is why we have endured not just one, but 2 and even 3 different displacements.
It is precisely the historic abandonment of the countryside what have brought some 5,000 rural residents to Colombia's capital, Bogota. Grouped in the so-called Agrarian Summit, they demand the government to commit to rural development, something they consider could even be part of the solution to the current border crisis with Venezuela.
For instance, some agricultural development poles could guarantee Colombia's food sovereignty, but could also supply Venezuela with food and agricultural products. As simple as that. What we need is to strengthen the economic on both sides in order to close the path for illegality.
Rural leaders have insisted on bilateral dialogue and negotiation as the way out of the border crisis, but also in order to maintain the good relations with neighboring Venezuela, which is crucial for Colombia's peace process. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
A group of indigenous Mapuche leaders gathered Tuesday in front of Santiago's presidential palace in a failed attempt to meet Chile's interior minister. Now this a few days after truckers from the south were allowed to enter the palace to protest what they claim are attacks committed by the Mapuche people. The Mapuche leaders delivered a letter to the government offering measures to solve the conflict. These measures include the creation of a Mapuche Commission for historical clarification to solve the infringements committed by the Chilean government, as well as the restitution of their territories. Another demand is the creation of a Mapuche Constituent Assembly, which they say is backed by international law.
The UN adopted a declaration that establishes the right of free determination of the Mapuche people. So we're here to ask the minister to participate in a Mapuche Constituent Assembly, which will take place next November.
We start our world news today in Baltimore, Maryland, in the U.S. The hearing of pretrial arguments started today in the case against 6 police officers accused of the death of a black man from an injury while he was in police custody. Now, the death of Freddie Gray last April became part of a national debate on police treatment of minorities in the United States. The hearing centered on defense motions seeking dismissal of the charges and the removal of the state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, and other prosecutors from the case. Charges against the officers range from second-degree murder for the driver to manslaughter, second-degree assault, and misconduct. 3 of the officers are white and 3 are black. Outside the court, dozens of activists protested against police brutality. And we're now going to, we're joined on the line now with one of the activists who was there at some of those protests in Baltimore. His name's Ryan Harvey, and he joins us from Baltimore. Hello there, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. You were at some of those protests this morning. What was the feeling there?
Well, it was smaller than a lot of the protests that were happening back in the original uprising. But, you know, there's definitely anger. There was the families of some other people who've been killed by the Baltimore City Police Department there. Yeah, we were marching downtown, and you know, we tied up a little bit of traffic. It was not a very serious situation. But then the cops just, you know, just got tense. And yeah, this young activist from Baltimore, who's somewhat well known, was standing in the road, and a truck, you know, just drove into him and knocked him over. And then the cops came up, and instead of like helping him, they were sort of like, well, why are you standing in the street? And he was like asking for medical attention, and they were like, well, you shouldn't have been standing in the street. And then they refused to help him, and then they just started to arrest him, and then they took out a taser, and they put the taser up, you know, to the back of his head, like as if they were going to execute him with a gun, which is not, you know, you should obviously not tase somebody, A, who's not being violent, B, in the neck or spine, which you could kill them. So anyways, and then a lot of cops came from around the corner with nightsticks, with batons, you know, and started to hit us. I got hit a couple times, just started to push everyone. And you could just tell we have a new chief of police. The old one, during the uprising, he lost his job. And I don't know if the orders are different or if it's just how the cops are, but you know, you could just feel the tension really strong. And to be honest, people want the tension, you know, like people are pissed. We're like really angry about what's happened and what's been happening. And it's not just Freddie Gray and this, it's lots of people, and it's, you know, the systemic issues underneath of them, the anti-black racism everywhere in the United States. There's the situation, like the neoliberal capitalism that's been the experience of poor America and Black America for so long. So it's just a breaking point. You can just kind of feel it.
I was sort of going to ask you, they're undergoing trial there. They were charged with crimes. So why have these protesters decided to once again come out? Why did you decide to once again take to the streets? You're explaining there briefly. It seems like you think you need to keep drawing attention to those systemic problems.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely, you know, the cat is out of the bag now, as we say. You know, the mask has been pulled off, as if, you know, it was even on in the first place. But really what's happening is that, you know, immediately today was the beginning of the pre-trial hearings of the case against the police. And so the police were trying to have the state's attorney put off of the case, like kicked off of the case, because they said that she didn't handle it properly. That was already on the first morning of the pretrial. That attempt by the police was put down by the judge. He said, there's no there's nowhere near enough evidence to suggest that she shouldn't be on the case. The other thing they were trying to do is the cops want to move the trial out of Baltimore so that there can't be protests. They want to try each cop as an individual so that their trials are all at different times, so it's harder for protests to happen. And of course, they also want to drop the charges. They wanted to say that the state's attorney is biased, and so these cops should never have been charged with anything. So we wanted to, first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we had some pressure outside to let the city know what we want and what should happen. But then on the larger note, it's like, this isn't just about Freddie Gray and these cops. It's not just about Baltimore. It's not even just about the U.S. This is like a global situation now, because you see it, people in Turkey, people in Egypt, people in South America, people in Europe, like everywhere, people have been focusing on what's been happening in Baltimore the same way that we focused on what was happening in Brazil and what was happening in Tunisia or anything. So we're on that map now, and sort of, coming out and keeping the pressure up is letting people know, the same way that Ferguson just recently on the anniversary, they let the world know, we're Ferguson, we're still here, we still want justice. And like we're still fighting. So we have that sort of larger global obligation to stay in the streets and like figure out how to move forward.
All right, Ryan Harvey joining us from Baltimore there. Ryan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we move on now. We're going to go, I believe, around the world. We go to Hungary. That's where hundreds of refugees are still outside the country's Kaleti train station in the capital Budapest. This as a wall of police officers prevent their entry. Camped out in makeshift camps wherever there is available space there. The refugees were evacuated from the train station as they were attempting to travel to other European destinations. This follows stringent new measures by Hungary to control the flow of refugees in the region. Hungary's new barbed wire fencing, which has recently been erected, has garnered harsh criticism from human rights organizations and the international community. And in light of the increasing numbers of refugees dying in their attempts to leave their home countries, the refugees outside Kaleti train station performed a mock funeral in protest against the treatment of their plights by European authorities. They are demanding that officials allow them into the station so that they can continue their journey to neighboring European countries. The social, health, and security-related ramifications of the high population density and overcrowding are among the factors that may render Gaza unlivable by the year 2020. Now, that's according to an annual report by the UN Conference on Trade and Development. The report added that while these conditions are not new to the Gaza Strip, Israeli military operations, as well as the 10-year economic blockade, have made the situation more dire for residents there. The UN says that the unemployment rate is at 30% and that 1 in 3 households are food insecure.
The unemployment in the occupied Palestinian territory, it's about 30%. Food insecurity is high. It's about 1 in 3 households are food insecure. The situation in Gaza is much worse. Actually, the unemployment in Gaza, it's about 44%, or slightly less than 0.5%. Every 1 in 2, they are not finding a job.
The U.S. President Barack Obama paid a visit to Alaska's glaciers to stress the challenge that future generations will face if the effects of climate change are not seriously considered today. Experts have been studying Alaska Kenai Fords National Park, saying that the fragility of that park, of that part of the world, lends to global warming at twice the rate of the rest of the globe. The much anticipated upcoming Paris Convention on Climate Change this December, which will be attended by world leaders, will address the adverse effects of climate change. 7 people have been killed and more than 40 others wounded when a car bomb exploded in the Syrian city of Latakia. Syria's Observatory for Human Rights has called it the biggest car bomb attack in Latakia since the war began. Since the war began in 2011, more than 240,000 people have been killed and many more displaced. Reports are that Turkish authorities are investigating the kidnapping of 18 Turkish workers by gunmen from a sports stadium they were building in northeastern Baghdad. Iraqi authorities are assisting in the investigation. Now, some fear this may be another hostage situation similar to that in 2014 when Sunni Muslim militants seized 46 Turkish citizens in the Iraqi city of Mosul. In that case, the hostages were released unharmed after more than 3 months. FIFA has convened the first meeting of a new reform committee, which is currently underway. As you may now by now know, the International Football Organization has been struggling with the effects of a major corruption scandal. Few experts believe the meeting will conclude with new robust proposals to restructure the organization. The reforms are being sought by prosecutors and sponsors. The crisis forced newly re-elected President Sepp Blatter to resign, but he is still heading the organization while new elections are scheduled for later this year or early 2016. And that's where we end it today on this Wednesday afternoon here from Caracas. Plenty more on those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Today we're going to leave you with the music from the colorful Notting Hill Festival, celebrated this Monday in the city of London. Enjoy.